Imagine standing at the altar surrounded by everyone you love, about to promise forever to the person of your dreams. The sun is shining, the flowers are perfect, and your future seems written in the stars. Now imagine that future shattering in a single moment, not because of cold feet or second thoughts, but because of a secret so devastating it rewrites everything you thought you knew about love, family, and your own identity. This is the story of a wedding that never happened, and the truth that destroyed it. A truth that had been buried for 32 years beneath layers of wealth, respectability, and calculated cruelty. A truth about stolen children, switched identities, and a woman whose love was so powerful it survived 3 decades of separation and lies. What began as a perfect ceremony in California's wine country became the unraveling of a conspiracy so twisted, so heartbreaking, that everyone who witnessed it would question everything they believed about the families they thought they knew. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, but some truths demand to be heard, no matter how much pain they bring, no matter how many lives they change forever. This is one of those truths, and once you hear it, you'll never forget it. If you want to hear more incredible stories that will move you, challenge you, and stay with you long after they end, make sure to follow this channel, leave a like, and comment below telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful narratives to life. The sun hung low over Napa Valley like a golden medallion pinned to the California sky, casting amber waves across rows of grapevines that stretched toward the horizon like green ocean waves frozen in time. It was the kind of afternoon that wedding photographers dream about. That perfect hour when light turns everything it touches into liquid gold, when shadows soften and the world seems to hold its breath in anticipation of something beautiful. 347 guests sat in pristine white folding chairs, arranged in careful semicircles on the manicured lawn of the Silverado Vineyards estate, one of Napa's most exclusive wedding venues. The chairs were adorned with bundles of lavender and wild sage tied with cream-colored silk ribbons that fluttered gently in the warm September breeze. Behind them, the Santa Cruz Mountains rose like silent witnesses, their peaks still kissed by the last remnants of summer heat. The air smelled of crushed grapes from the nearby harvest, mixed with expensive perfume and the heady sweetness of the gardenias that lined the aisle. At the front, beneath an arch woven with olive branches and white roses, a tribute to Samantha's grandmother's Greek heritage, stood David Mitchell, 32 years old, wearing a Tom Ford navy suit that fit him like it had been painted on. His dark hair was swept back, still damp from the nervous shower he'd taken that morning. His hands, those hands that had held surgical instruments steady through 12-hour shifts at UCSF Medical Center, now trembled visibly as they gripped Samantha's delicate fingers. Samantha Holloway looked like something out of a fairy tale that had been filtered through Vogue magazine. Her Vera Wang gown, a cascade of ivory silk and French lace that had cost more than most people's cars, caught the light with every microscopic movement. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, revealing the diamond earrings that had belonged to her late grandmother, the formidable Eleanor Holloway, whose oil portrait still hung in the family's Sacramento mansion, like a stern reminder of legacy and expectation. The string quartet, flown in from San Francisco, played Pachelbel's canon in D with such precision that several guests had already dabbed their eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs. Samantha's mother, Patricia Holloway, sat in the front row wearing Chanel and an expression that suggested she was mentally calculating the cost per minute of this production. Next to her, Samantha's father, Richard, a retired Silicon Valley executive worth somewhere north of $40 million, kept checking his Apple Watch even though he'd promised his daughter he'd be present for every second of her special day. On David's side, the crowd was smaller, more modest. His adoptive parents, Martha and George Mitchell, sat with their hands clasped together, both wearing suits from Macy's that they'd bought on sale. They'd raised David in a 3-bedroom ranch house in Sacramento, working double shifts, George as a high school history teacher, Martha as a nurse at Mercy General, to put him through college and then medical school. They looked overwhelmed by the grandeur of it all, like they'd accidentally wandered into someone else's dream. The celebrant, a jovial Presbyterian minister named Reverend Thomas who'd baptized Samantha as a baby, cleared his throat and smiled at the assembled crowd. His voice boomed across the lawn with practiced authority. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and these witnesses to join together David Robert Mitchell and Samantha Grace Holloway in holy matrimony." That's when David's hand began to shake. At first, it was barely noticeable, a small tremor that Samantha attributed to normal wedding jitters. She squeezed his fingers reassuringly, offering him that radiant smile that had made him fall in love with her 3 years ago when they'd met at a hospital fundraiser. But the trembling didn't stop. If anything, it intensified, spreading up his arm like an electrical current seeking ground. David's eyes, those warm brown eyes that Samantha loved to get lost in, suddenly fixed on something beyond the altar, beyond the guests, beyond the carefully orchestrated perfection of this moment. His gaze traveled to the very back row of seats, where the latecomers and plus-ones sat, where the uninvited might slip in unnoticed. There, in the last chair on the left side, sat a woman no one recognized. She was elderly, perhaps 70, perhaps older, with a weathered face that spoke of hard years and harder choices. Her clothes were simple, a faded floral dress that might have come from Goodwill, clean but dated, and a blue scarf tied over her silver hair in a style that belonged to another era. Her hands, gnarled and work-worn, clutched a small purse in her lap. But it was her eyes, those eyes, that held David paralyzed. They were wet with unshed tears, fixed on him with an intensity that felt like a physical touch, like invisible fingers reaching across the lawn to grab his throat and squeeze. The Reverend continued, oblivious. "Marriage is a sacred covenant, not to be entered into lightly but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God." David's face had gone pale. Beads of sweat formed on his temples, despite the pleasant weather. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. Samantha's smile faltered. She leaned in and whispered, "Baby, are you okay? Do you need water?" But David wasn't hearing her. He was staring at that woman in the blue scarf, and she was staring back, and something unspeakable passed between them. Some recognition, some terrible understanding that made his entire body go rigid. He pulled his hands away from Samantha's. The gesture was so abrupt, so unexpected that several guests in the front row gasped audibly. The violins faltered mid-note. Samantha's mouth opened in confusion, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly seeming garish against her shocked expression. "David?" Her voice cracked on his name. He turned to face the crowd. 347 pairs of eyes locked onto him. The sun seemed too bright now, too hot. The smell of gardenias became cloying, suffocating. Somewhere in the vineyards a bird called out, a sharp, piercing cry that sounded almost like a warning. David's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, but in the absolute silence that had fallen over the ceremony, it carried like thunder. "I'm sorry, God, I'm so sorry, but I can't do this." The Reverend's jovial expression crumbled. "Son, it's natural to feel nervous, but..." "No." David's voice grew stronger, louder, edged with something that sounded like desperation. "You don't understand. I received something last night, something that changes everything." He reached into the inside pocket of his Tom Ford suit jacket, the jacket Samantha had helped him pick out at Neiman Marcus, laughing as they'd sipped champagne and imagined their perfect future, and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It looked obscene in that moment, that wrinkled, stained paper amid all this carefully curated beauty. Samantha's mother stood up, her Chanel purse falling to the grass. "What is the meaning of this?" Patricia's voice carried the imperious tone of someone used to controlling situations, to managing crises with checkbooks and stern phone calls to the right people. David ignored her. His eyes found Samantha's, and in them she saw something she'd never seen before. Not just fear, but horror. Soul-deep, existential horror. "Last night," he said, his voice breaking, "someone left a box on my porch, an old shoebox. Inside were letters, documents, photographs." He paused, swallowing hard. "And the truth about who you really are, Samantha. About who I really am." About what we're about to do? The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one could see yet, but everyone could smell. Samantha shook her head slowly, her veil shifting with the movement. David, you're not making sense. What are you talking about? But David wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking past her, past the altar with its olive branches and white roses, past the horrified faces of their families, back to that woman in the blue scarf. And she was standing now, rising slowly, painfully, like someone lifting a weight that had been pressing down on them for decades. Her lips moved, forming words no one could hear from that distance. But David heard them. Or maybe he just read them on her weathered face in the way her gnarled hands reached toward him across the impossible distance of the lawn. That woman, David said, pointing with a shaking finger, is named Isabel, and she's my mother, my real mother. The gasps were louder now, a wave of shock rolling through the crowd like wind through wheat. Several guests stood up, craning their necks to see the woman David was pointing at. She stood there, this stranger in her faded dress and blue scarf, tears now streaming down her face, her entire body trembling. And the documents in that box, David continued, his voice rising to something approaching hysteria. They tell a story about a pregnant maid who worked in a mansion in Sacramento 32 years ago. A story about a baby taken from his mother. A story about secrets and lies and... He looked at Samantha, and the anguish in his eyes made several women in the audience sob openly. And blood, shared blood. Samantha stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. No, that's impossible. You're having some kind of breakdown. David, please. The mansion, David said, his voice now flat, dead, like he was reading from a script written by a cruel god, was owned by your family, by the Holloways. And Isabel, he gestured again toward the woman who stood frozen in the back row. She worked for your grandmother, for Eleanor Holloway. The name landed like a bomb. Richard Holloway was on his feet now, his face purple with rage or shock or both. This is absurd, I have the documents, David shouted, pulling more papers from his pocket, waving them at the crowd. Birth certificates, employment records, letters, all of it. Someone wanted me to know the truth before I... He choked on the word. Before I married my own sister. The screaming started then, not from one person, but from multiple people at once. A chorus of horror and disbelief and scandal that rolled across the lawn like a tsunami. Samantha collapsed, her expensive dress pooling around her like spilled milk. Her bridesmaids rushed forward, their pastel gowns a blur of pink and lavender. David's adoptive mother was crying, her hands pressed to her face. George stood helplessly beside her, his arm around her shaking shoulders. And through it all, across the chaos and the screaming and the collapse of carefully constructed realities, David and Isabel locked eyes. She mouthed something to him. 3 words, barely visible across the distance. I'm so sorry. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the vineyards, leaving behind only the blue scarf that had fallen from her head, fluttering in the breeze like a flag of surrender. The wedding photographer, who'd been hired for $8,000 to capture every magical moment, lowered his camera. Even he knew. Some moments aren't meant to be preserved. Some moments are meant to shatter everything you thought you knew about love, about family, about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of our lives. As the sun continued its descent toward the mountains, casting longer and longer shadows across the ruined ceremony, one thought echoed in the mind of every person present. What truth could be so terrible that it would destroy a wedding at the altar? And what other secrets were buried in the perfectly manicured gardens of the families we think we know? The night before the wedding, David Mitchell had been unable to sleep. It wasn't the typical pre-wedding jitters that kept him tossing and turning in the king-sized bed of his rented suite at the Napa Valley Lodge, though those certainly played their part. It was something else, something deeper, a restlessness that felt almost like a premonition, like his body knew something his mind hadn't yet processed. At 11:30 p.m., he'd given up on sleep entirely. He'd thrown on a pair of Stanford sweatpants and an old t-shirt from his residency days, poured himself 2 fingers of Maker's Mark bourbon from the minibar, and stepped out onto the private terrace that overlooked the moonlit vineyards. The air was cool, crisp with that particular Northern California night chill that makes you grateful for the warmth of whiskey in your stomach. He'd been standing there for maybe 10 minutes watching the silver light play across the grape leaves, thinking about how his life was about to change forever, when he heard it. A soft thud against the wooden planks of the terrace floor, like something had been dropped or placed there deliberately. David turned, his heart suddenly hammering for reasons he couldn't explain. There, sitting on the welcome mat just outside his suite door, was a shoebox. Not a new one from Nordstrom or Nike, but an old battered thing, the kind that might have held a pair of women's pumps back in the 1980s. It was blue, faded to almost gray in places, with water stains along the edges and corners held together with yellowed tape that was peeling away like old skin. There was no note on top, no mailing label, no return address. Just this anonymous box sitting there like an accusation, like a time bomb wrapped in cardboard and secrets. David looked up and down the hallway. Empty, silent. The lodge was quiet at this hour. Most of the wedding party had turned in early, saving their energy for tomorrow's celebration. He could hear the distant hum of the ice machine, the soft whisper of the HVAC system, but no footsteps, no voices, no indication of who might have left this package. He should have left it there, should have called the front desk, reported suspicious activity, let hotel security handle it. In 2019 and post-9/11 America, you didn't just open mysterious packages that appeared on your doorstep in the middle of the night. But something compelled him, that same premonition that had kept him awake, to pick up the box, carry it inside, and set it on the mahogany writing desk by the window. It was surprisingly light, almost empty feeling. David sat down in the desk chair, his bourbon forgotten, and stared at this thing for a full 5 minutes before working up the courage to lift the lid. Inside, the smell hit him first, that distinctive odor of old paper, of things kept in attics and basements, of time passing and memories decaying. The box was filled with documents, photographs, and letters, all jumbled together like someone had packed them in a hurry, or with hands that were shaking too much to organize properly. David's hands trembled as he reached in and pulled out the first item, a photograph, black and white, the kind with the white border and the date stamp on the back, July 15, 1992. It showed a young woman, perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was smiling, but there was something sad in her eyes, something defeated. She wore a simple maid's uniform, black dress, white apron, and she was standing in front of what looked like a very expensive house, the kind with columns and manicured hedges, and the weight of old money pressing down on every brick. In her arms, she held a baby, a tiny infant wrapped in a blue blanket with a shock of dark hair and eyes that hadn't yet learned to focus on anything beyond basic shapes and light. David flipped the photo over. Written on the back in faded blue ink, Isabel and her son, last day before they took him. God forgive us all. His breath caught in his throat, his vision blurred. He blinked hard, trying to focus, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. But the baby in that photo, he recognized something in the way the infant's ear was shaped, in the particular curl of that dark hair. He'd seen that exact same ear shape every morning in the mirror for 32 years. That same hair pattern that never quite laid flat, no matter how much gel he used. With shaking hands, he dug deeper into the box. More photographs tumbled out. Isabel, if that was her name, in various stages of pregnancy, always wearing that maid's uniform, always with that same sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. Isabel sitting on a bus bench, her belly swollen, looking exhausted. Isabel in what appeared to be a hospital room, holding that blue bundled baby, tears streaming down her face while someone just outside the frame of the photo, you could see their shadow, reach toward her with outstretched arms. Then the letters. God, the letters. There were dozens of them, written in careful cursive on lined notebook paper, the kind children use in elementary school. Some were dated, some weren't. but they spanned years: 1992, 1995, 1998, 2001, all the way up to 2015. David's hands shook so badly he could barely hold the first letter steady enough to read it. The paper was thin, fragile, stained with what might have been tears, old tears that had dried decades ago, but left their mark like fossils in stone. "My dearest son," it began, and David felt something crack open in his chest, some sealed chamber he hadn't known existed. "I don't know if you will ever read this. I don't even know if I will ever have the courage to send it. But I write it anyway, because the truth needs to exist somewhere, even if only on paper, even if only in secret." The letter went on to describe how Isabel Rodriguez, she signed it, had worked as a housekeeper for the Holloway family in their Sacramento mansion starting in 1991. How she'd been young, alone in America, sending money back to her mother in Guadalupe, Mexico. How one of the Holloway family's friends, a man whose name she wouldn't write down, had cornered her in the laundry room one August afternoon and stolen something from her that she could never get back. When she discovered she was pregnant, she'd been terrified. She'd gone to Mrs. Eleanor Holloway, the matriarch of the family, hoping for understanding, for help, for some kind of compassion. Instead, she'd been accused of trying to trap a rich man, of being a gold digger, of attempting to destroy a prominent family's reputation. Eleanor had given her two choices: leave immediately and give the baby up for adoption through the Holloway family's private attorney, receiving a small sum of money to start over, or be reported to immigration authorities and deported, with the baby being taken anyway and placed in foster care. "I chose you," Isabel wrote, the handwriting becoming more erratic, more emotional as the letter progressed. "I chose your safety over my own heart. They promised me you would go to a good family, that you would be loved, that you would have opportunities I could never give you. They made me sign papers I didn't fully understand. They gave me $5,000 in cash and a bus ticket to Los Angeles. I held you for exactly 47 minutes after you were born, and then they took you from my arms." David had to stop reading. He stood up so fast the chair fell over backward, clattering against the hardwood floor. He stumbled to the bathroom and vomited into the toilet, his entire body shaking, sweat pouring down his face. The bourbon burned coming back up, mixing with the bile of shock and horror and recognition. When he could breathe again, he returned to the desk. There were more letters, each one a birthday wish sent into the void, a Christmas greeting addressed to "my son wherever you are," a mother's prayer that somehow, someday, he would know she hadn't wanted to abandon him. But it was the documents at the bottom of the box that made his blood run cold. A birth certificate, partially torn but still legible. Baby boy Rodriguez, born July 15, 1992, at Mercy General Hospital, Sacramento, California. Mother, Isabel Maria Rodriguez. Father, unknown. An adoption decree from Sacramento County Superior Court, dated August 2, 1992, showing that said baby had been legally adopted by Martha and George Mitchell of Sacramento, California. The child's name had been changed to David Robert Mitchell. And then, at the very bottom, a document that made the room spin. Employment records from Holloway Estate Management, showing Isabel Rodriguez's dates of service, March 1991 to August 1992. Address of employment, 2847 Winding Way, Sacramento, California. David knew that address. He'd been to that house a dozen times. It was Samantha's childhood home, the Holloway family mansion where her grandmother Eleanor had ruled like a queen until her death 3 years ago. His hands were numb as he pulled out the final envelope, the one that had been placed deliberately on top of all the other contents, as if someone wanted to make sure he saw it last, after he'd absorbed everything else. It was sealed with red wax like something from a Gothic novel, and across the front, in fresh black ink that couldn't be more than a few days old, were 7 words that made his heart stop. "Your destiny is joining the blood that expelled you." Inside was a single sheet of paper. No signature, no date, just a message typed in Times New Roman font, cold and clinical. "David, The woman you are about to marry shares the same bloodline that destroyed your mother and stole you from her arms. Eleanor Holloway was not just Samantha's grandmother. She was the architect of your separation from Isabel. Do with this information what your conscience demands. But know this: some sins echo through generations, and some reunions are not destiny but curse. The woman in the blue scarf will be watching from the last row. She deserves to see her son one last time before he makes the same mistake his mother was forced into, binding himself to the family that broke her. Choose wisely. David had sat there until 4:30 in the morning, reading and rereading every document, studying every photograph, trying to find some indication that this was a sick joke, a cruel prank, some kind of misunderstanding. But the evidence was irrefutable. The dates aligned. The places matched. And when he looked at that photograph of Isabel holding her newborn son, he saw his own face staring back at him across 32 years of separation and lies. Now standing at the altar with Samantha's hands in his, with 347 witnesses and the California sun and the smell of gardenias, all he could think about was that blue shoebox and the secrets it contained, and the woman in the blue scarf sitting in the last row, watching him with eyes that held 3 decades of grief. The aftermath of the ruined ceremony played out like a disaster movie in slow motion. Guests scattered across the vineyard lawn like startled birds, some rushing toward their cars in the parking lot, others clustering in small groups to whisper and speculate and record everything on their iPhones for later dissection on social media. The string quartet had packed up their instruments in record time, as if the scandal might be contagious. The catering staff stood frozen by their elegant tables of untouched hors d'oeuvres, unsure whether to stay or flee, whether they'd still be paid for a wedding that had imploded before the vows were even spoken. Samantha had been taken to the bridal suite by her mother and bridesmaids, all of them forming a protective wall around her as she sobbed uncontrollably, her Vera Wang gown now wrinkled and stained with tears, and the grass she'd collapsed onto. Through the closed door, David could hear her wailing, a sound that cut through him like broken glass, sharp and ragged and accusing. David's adoptive parents had tried to approach him, their faces masks of confusion and hurt. But he'd held up a hand to stop them. "Not now," he'd said, his voice hoarse. "Please, I need to understand this first." George Mitchell had nodded slowly, his history teacher's instinct recognizing when someone needed space to process information that would change everything. Martha had clutched her husband's arm, tears streaming down her face, and they'd retreated to their rental car, sitting in the parking lot with the engine off, waiting for their son to need them. By 6 p.m., as the sun began its descent toward the Pacific Ocean somewhere beyond the mountains, David sat alone in the Napa Valley Lodge Business Center, a small room with 2 desktop computers and a printer that smelled like toner and desperation. The blue shoebox sat on the desk beside him, its contents spread out like evidence at a crime scene. He'd called Mercy General Hospital first, the place where he'd been born, where he now worked as a trauma surgeon. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent years saving lives in the same building where his own life had been irrevocably altered, before he was even old enough to remember it. The night shift administrator, a woman named Gloria, who David had shared countless coffee breaks with during his residency, had been sympathetic but firm. "David, honey, I heard what happened at your wedding. Half the staff is texting about it. But you know I can't just pull records from 1992 without proper authorization. HIPAA regulations. Gloria, please." David's voice cracked. "I need to know if this is real. I need to see my original birth certificate, the one before the adoption." There'd been a long pause on the other end of the line. He could hear Gloria typing, the click of computer keys, the hum of the hospital in the background, sounds that usually comforted him, but now felt alien and distant. "I'm going to do something I could lose my job for," Gloria finally said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Because I've known you for 8 years and you're a good man, and I think you deserve to know the truth about where you came from. But you didn't hear this from me, understand?" "I understand. There is a birth certificate on file for a David Robert Mitchell, born July 15, 1992. But there's a flag on it, a court seal from an adoption proceeding. The original certificate was amended." The biological mother's name was, more typing, Isabel Maria Rodriguez. The father's name on the original certificate was listed, but it's been redacted, literally crossed out with black ink so many times you can't read it. I've never seen that before. Usually it's just left blank or says unknown, but someone really didn't want that name to be readable. David's hand tightened around his phone. Can you tell me anything else? Any notes in the file? There's a notation that the birth was attended by Dr. Richard Holloway, who was on staff here at the time. He's retired now, moved to... Wait. Gloria's voice changed, became strained. Dr. Richard Holloway. David, isn't that... Samantha's father, David finished, the words tasting like poison. Her father delivered me. He was there when I was born, when I was taken from Isabel. The implications crashed over him like a wave. Richard Holloway had been part of this from the very beginning, had literally held David in his hands moments after his birth, had been complicit in the separation of mother and child. And for 32 years, through 3 years of dating his daughter, through countless family dinners and holiday gatherings, the man had never said a word, had looked David in the eye and smiled and welcomed him into the family while knowing exactly who he was and where he'd come from. After hanging up with Gloria, David had driven straight to the Sacramento County Recorder's office even though it was Saturday and officially closed. He'd pounded on the locked glass doors until a security guard, an older black man named James, who recognized David from a news story about a mass casualty event at the hospital where David had saved 17 lives, had let him in. "Doc, you look like hell," James had said, concern creasing his weathered face. "What's going on?" David had explained everything in a rush of words that probably didn't make much sense, but James had listened with the patience of someone who'd seen enough human tragedy to know that sometimes people just needed someone to witness their pain. "I can't access the sealed records," James had said apologetically, "but I can let you use the public records terminal. If there's anything that wasn't sealed by court order, you'll be able to find it." David had spent 2 hours searching through digitized records, his eyes burning from staring at the screen, his back aching from hunching over the keyboard. He'd found property records showing that the Holloway family had owned the mansion on Winding Way since 1987. He'd found business licenses showing Eleanor Holloway had employed several domestic workers through the early 1990s, though their names weren't listed. He'd found death certificates, Eleanor's dated March 2022, cause of death listed as cardiac arrest, though whispers at the funeral had suggested it was really complications from decades of alcoholism and prescription drug abuse. And then he'd found something that made his blood run cold. A court filing from August 1992, a petition to seal all records related to a private domestic matter involving a minor child. The petitioner was listed as Eleanor J. Holloway, represented by the law firm of Whitmore and Associates, one of Sacramento's most prestigious and expensive legal practices. The petition had been granted, and an entire family's history had been buried under legal protections that would last until the year 2067, 75 years after David's birth. Someone had paid a lot of money to make sure these secrets stayed hidden. Someone had wielded enough power and influence to convince a judge that the truth was so dangerous, so damaging, that it needed to be locked away for 3/4 of a century. By the time David left the recorder's office, the sun had set completely. Sacramento's downtown was alive with Saturday night energy. Couples heading to dinner at the trendy restaurants along K Street, groups of friends laughing their way into nightclubs, the blissful ignorance of people whose lives hadn't been shattered by revelations of blood and betrayal. David drove back to Napa on autopilot, his mind spinning with questions that multiplied faster than he could process them. Why had someone sent him that box now, the night before his wedding? Who knew the truth and had decided this was the moment to reveal it? And why had Isabel shown up at the ceremony? Was she trying to stop the wedding, or was she simply taking what might be her only chance to see the son who'd been stolen from her? When he pulled into the lodge parking lot at nearly midnight, Samantha was waiting for him. She sat on the stone wall near the entrance, still wearing her wedding dress but with a hoodie pulled over it. One of his hoodies, he realized, one he'd left in her car weeks ago. Her makeup was destroyed, black mascara tracks staining her cheeks, her hair falling loose from its elegant chignon. She looked young and broken and furious all at once. "Where the hell have you been?" she demanded as he approached, her voice raw from crying. "You destroy our wedding with some insane accusation? You humiliate me in front of everyone I know and then you just disappear?" "I went to find proof," David said quietly, "to see if any of it was real." "And?" Samantha stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. "Was it? Is this nightmare actually happening, or did you have some kind of psychotic break?" David pulled out his phone and showed her the photos he'd taken of the documents, the birth certificate, the court filings. He watched her face as she scrolled through them, watched the anger slowly drain away to be replaced by something worse. A dawning horror, a creeping realization that her entire family history might be built on lies and cruelty. "My father delivered you," she whispered, staring at the birth certificate. "He was there, he knew." "And never said anything," David confirmed. "Not once in 3 years." Samantha looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw his own anguish reflected back. "What does this mean? Are we—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't give voice to the possibility that had been clawing at both of them since the ceremony. "I don't know," David admitted. "The records are sealed. The father's name is crossed out. But Isabel worked for your grandmother and the timing—" "Stop!" Samantha held up a hand. "Just stop. I can't. I need to talk to my parents. I need answers from them, not speculation." She turned to leave, but David caught her arm gently. "Sam, wait. Isabel left something at the ceremony. James, the security guard at the recorder's office, he went back and found it. The staff was cleaning up and they'd collected all the lost items." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the blue scarf that had fallen from Isabel's head when she'd fled the ceremony. It smelled faintly of lavender and old memories, and pinned to it was a small piece of paper, a note written in the same careful cursive from the letters in the shoebox. Samantha took it with trembling hands and read aloud, "Don't hate me. I only wanted you to know the truth before you made the same mistake they forced upon me. Some bloodlines are meant to be broken, not bound. The woman at the last bench who loves you both more than you know." The Holloway mansion on Winding Way stood like a monument to old California money, the kind of wealth that came from land deals in the 1950s, from oil investments and tech stocks and knowing the right people at the right country clubs. It was a sprawling Mediterranean-style estate with terracotta roof tiles, cream-colored stucco walls and iron balconies that overlooked gardens, maintained by a rotating crew of landscapers who arrived every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork. David had been to this house dozens of times during his relationship with Samantha. He'd attended Christmas dinners in the formal dining room with its crystal chandelier imported from Vienna. He'd swum in the saltwater pool while Richard Holloway grilled steaks and talked about his glory days at Stanford. He'd slept in the guest room with the 4-poster bed and Egyptian cotton sheets, always careful to respect the Holloway family's old-fashioned values about unmarried couples staying in separate rooms under their roof. But he'd never been invited to explore the parts of the house that weren't meant for guests. The basement storage, the servants' quarters that had been converted into a home gym. And certainly never the attic, that dusty, forgotten space where families stored the things they couldn't quite throw away, but didn't want to look at anymore. It was Tuesday morning, 3 days after the destroyed wedding, when David and Samantha made the decision to search the mansion together. Patricia Holloway was at her weekly bridge club meeting, and Richard had gone to play golf at the Sacramento Country Club, maintaining his routine as if his world hadn't just exploded into scandal and suspicion. The house was empty except for the cleaning service, and Samantha had called them and given them the day off, lying about a family emergency, which wasn't really a lie at all. They stood in the grand foyer with its marble floors and sweeping staircase, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The house felt different now, oppressive, like the walls themselves were keeping secrets. Every oil painting of stern-faced Holloway ancestors, every piece of antique furniture, every carefully curated detail felt like evidence of something corrupt hidden beneath a veneer of respectability. "The attic access is in my grandmother's old bedroom," Samantha said quietly, her voice echoing in the empty house. Nobody's been up there since she died. Mom wanted to hire someone to clean it out, but Dad kept saying there was no rush, that we'd deal with it eventually. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, then down a hallway lined with family photos. Samantha as a baby, Samantha's first day of kindergarten, Samantha graduating from Berkeley. David noticed there were no photos of Eleanor as a young woman, no wedding pictures, no images of her as a mother with young children. The Holloway family history seemed to begin in the 1980s, as if everything before that had been deliberately erased. Eleanor's bedroom was exactly as she'd left it 3 years ago, a time capsule of wealth and loneliness. The king-sized bed was made with military precision, covered in a silk duvet the color of old money. Her vanity still held bottles of Chanel No. 5 and prescription pill bottles from Sacramento's most exclusive pharmacy. On the nightstand, a leather-bound Bible that looked like it had never been opened sat next to a crystal tumbler with the ghost of lipstick on its rim. The attic access was a pull-down ladder hidden in the ceiling of the walk-in closet, disguised among the crown molding. Samantha had to stand on a chair to reach the cord, and when she pulled it, the ladder unfolded with a groan of metal that sounded almost like a protest, like the house itself didn't want them to go up there. David went first, climbing into darkness until his hands found a light switch. A single bare bulb flickered to life, revealing a space that stretched the entire length of the house. Low-ceilinged, cramped, thick with dust, and the smell of old cardboard and mothballs and secrets kept too long. The attic was packed with boxes, dozens of them labeled in Eleanor's precise handwriting. Christmas decorations 1995, Richard's school records, tax documents 1988, 1992. There were old pieces of furniture covered with sheets, a dress form that looked like it belonged in a Victorian novel, stacks of National Geographic magazines from the 1970s, and in the far corner, barely visible in the dim light, a small door, the kind that led to attic storage space built into the eaves of the house. "I didn't know that was there," Samantha whispered, pointing at the door. "I used to play up here when I was little, but grandmother would always yell at me if I went near that corner. She said there were rats." They picked their way through the maze of boxes, their footsteps raising small clouds of dust that hung in the air like ghosts. The door had a padlock on it, an old master lock that looked like it had been there for decades, its brass surface tarnished green with age. David pulled on it experimentally. Locked tight. "Wait here," Samantha said, disappearing back down the ladder. She returned 5 minutes later with a hammer and a screwdriver. "From the garage. I figure we're already violating about a dozen boundaries. What's a little breaking and entering in our own family home?" It took David 3 solid hits with the hammer before the lock's shackle broke free from the latch. The door swung inward with a creak that sounded like a sigh of relief, like something had been waiting 30 years to exhale. Inside was a small room, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, with a sloped ceiling that followed the roofline. There was a single window painted black from the inside so no light could enter or escape. And scattered across the floor, preserved in this sealed tomb of a room, were the remnants of a life that someone had tried very hard to erase. A child's rocking chair, small and painted white, sat in one corner. Beside it was a cardboard box filled with toys, a stuffed bunny with one ear missing, wooden blocks with faded letters, a set of plastic keys on a ring. On a makeshift shelf made from boards and bricks, there were children's books, Goodnight Moon, Where the Wild Things Are, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, all classics from the early 1990s. But it was what David found behind the rocking chair that made his heart stop. A small wooden trunk, the kind you might buy at a craft store and paint yourself. This one was painted pale blue, with white flowers hand-painted on the lid. Amateur, but lovingly done. And on the front, in careful gold script, a name. Isabel. Samantha gasped when she saw it. They knelt together in the dust and David lifted the lid with trembling hands. Inside were more treasures, more evidence of a life lived in secret within these walls. A maid's uniform, carefully folded, with a name tag still pinned to it. I, Rodriguez. A rosary made of wooden beads, worn smooth from countless prayers. A photograph album with a cracked leather cover. David opened the album with hands that felt numb. The first page showed Isabel, younger than in the photos from the shoebox, maybe 22 or 23, standing in the Holloway mansion's kitchen, wearing that same maid's uniform, smiling uncertainly at the camera. Someone had written beneath it, "First day, so nervous." The subsequent pages documented her life here. Isabel dusting the library, Isabel arranging flowers in a crystal vase, Isabel sitting on the back steps during what must have been a break, eating lunch from a brown paper bag, her face tilted toward the sun with an expression of simple contentment. And then the photos changed. Isabel's stomach began to swell beneath her uniform. The smile became strained, then disappeared entirely. In one photo, she stood with her hand on her pregnant belly, looking directly at the camera with an expression of such desperate hope that it was painful to witness. The caption read, "6 months, still praying for a miracle." The final photos in the album showed Isabel in what appeared to be this very attic room, holding a tiny baby wrapped in a blue blanket. She was crying, her face contorted with a grief so raw that it transcended the years and the faded photo paper and reached directly into David's chest. The caption read, "July 14th, 1992. Last night together. They come tomorrow." "Oh my God," Samantha breathed, tears streaming down her face. She lived up here. She was pregnant and they made her live in the attic like some kind of... She couldn't finish the sentence. David kept digging through the trunk. At the bottom, beneath layers of tissue paper that had yellowed with age, he found letters. Not the ones from the shoebox, but different letters. These were addressed to Eleanor Holloway, written in Isabel's careful handwriting, pleading letters asking for mercy, for understanding, for a chance to keep her baby. "Mrs. Holloway," one letter began, dated May 1992. "I understand your concerns about scandal and reputation, but this baby is innocent. Please, I am begging you, let me keep my son. I will work double shifts. I will never ask for anything. I will disappear from California if you want, just please don't take my baby." Eleanor's response was paper-clipped to the letter, a single typed sentence on Holloway Estate letterhead. "Your employment will be terminated effective August 3rd, 1992. All matters regarding the child will be handled through legal counsel. Do not attempt to contact this family again." Samantha made a choking sound and turned away, pressing her hands against her mouth. David found more letters, more desperate pleas, all met with cold rejection or no response at all. And then at the very bottom of the trunk, a small blue baby blanket, the same one from the photographs, with David, embroidered in white thread across one corner. "She made this for you," Samantha whispered, reaching out to touch the soft, worn fabric. "She embroidered your name. She knew what she was going to call you." But there was something else in the trunk, something that neither of them had noticed at first because it had been wrapped in that blanket. David carefully unfolded the fabric and found a doll, an expensive porcelain doll with dark, curly hair and a Victorian dress, the kind that cost hundreds of dollars at specialty shops. Pinned to the doll's dress was a yellowed note in different handwriting, more elegant, more educated. "For my daughter, when she is old enough to understand. With love, Mother." Samantha's hand flew to her mouth. "I had a doll like this," she whispered. "Exactly like this. It disappeared when I was 7. I thought I'd lost it. Grandmother told me it had been stolen by the cleaning service, that I should have taken better care of my things." They looked at each other in the dusty attic light, and David saw in Samantha's eyes the same terrible understanding that was crystallizing in his own mind. This room wasn't just Isabel's hiding place. This was a nursery. A secret nursery where Eleanor Holloway had kept the evidence of her family's sins locked away like contraband. Patricia Holloway's Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway at exactly 4:30 p.m., right on schedule from her bridge club meeting. Through the front window of the mansion, Samantha watched her mother emerge from the car, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, Tory Burch handbag, the kind of woman who had never had a hair out of place or a secret she couldn't bury under layers of designer clothing and country club memberships. But today, Samantha was going to excavate every secret, no matter how deep Patricia had buried them. David stood behind her in the foyer, holding the blue baby blanket with his name embroidered on it. The physical proof of a history that couldn't be denied or explained away. They'd agreed that Samantha would confront her mother first, alone. Some conversations required the intimacy of blood, even when that blood was contaminated with lies. Patricia walked through the front door, her smile already in place, that practiced expression she'd perfected over decades of junior league meetings and charity galas. But it faltered when she saw Samantha's face, and it died completely when she noticed the dust covering her daughter's clothes, the attic grime under her fingernails, the fury burning in her eyes. "Samantha, darling, what on earth?" "We found the room." Samantha's voice was flat, emotionless, the calm before a Category 5 hurricane. "The one in the attic, behind the locked door. The one where you kept Isabel Rodriguez like a dirty secret." The color drained from Patricia's face. Her Hermes scarf seemed to tighten around her throat. She looked past Samantha to David, then back to her daughter, and in that moment of calculation, Samantha saw something she'd never seen before in her mother's eyes. Genuine fear. "I don't know what you think you found, but don't." Samantha's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare lie to me anymore. I have spent my entire life believing I knew who I was, where I came from, what family meant. And it was all a lie, wasn't it? Everything was a lie." Patricia set down her handbag with trembling hands and walked past them into the living room, the one reserved for important guests, with the antique furniture and the oil paintings of people who were probably just as corrupt as the current generation. She poured herself a vodka tonic from the bar cart at 4:30 in the afternoon, which told Samantha everything about how serious this was going to be. "Your grandmother," Patricia began, her back still turned, staring out the window at the manicured gardens, "was a very complicated woman. She came from nothing, you know. Grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Stockton, daughter of a grocery store clerk. She married your grandfather because he had money and connections, and she spent the rest of her life terrified that someone would discover she wasn't really one of them. The old Sacramento families with their heritage and their legacy. I don't give a damn about grandmother's insecurities," Samantha said, her voice rising. "I want to know about Isabel Rodriguez. I want to know about the baby she had in this house. I want to know why there were photos of me as an infant that I've never seen before, stored in that attic room like evidence at a crime scene." Patricia took a long drink of her vodka tonic. Her hand was shaking so badly the ice cubes rattled against the glass. When she turned around, tears were streaming down her face, cutting through her foundation, revealing the human being beneath the careful construction. "I was 19 when I got pregnant with you," she said quietly. 19 years old, unmarried in 1991. Your father and I weren't even engaged yet. We were young and stupid and careless, and when I told Mother I was pregnant, she..." Patricia's voice broke. She was furious. "Said I would ruin the family name, that I was just like my father's sister who'd gotten pregnant in the 60s and had to be sent away to have the baby in secret." Samantha felt her world tilting on its axis. "What are you saying?" "Mother made arrangements," Patricia continued, each word seeming to cost her something. "She found a private doctor, someone discreet, someone who would help us avoid scandal. The plan was for me to go away to study abroad for a semester, have the baby in secret and give it up for adoption. But when I was 7 months pregnant, something went wrong. I started bleeding. They rushed me to Mercy General in the middle of the night." David's sharp intake of breath behind Samantha made Patricia look at him for the first time since she'd started talking. "Your father was the attending physician that night, David. Richard Holloway. He saved my life and my baby's life. And that's when Mother realized she couldn't go through with the adoption plan. I'd almost died. The baby, you, Samantha, you'd almost died. Even she couldn't separate a mother from a child after that." "But I'm still here," Samantha said, confusion mixing with her anger. "I grew up here. You kept me." Patricia nodded, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup. "Yes. Mother agreed to let me keep you, but only under conditions. Richard and I had to get married immediately. A small ceremony, very quiet before you were born. We had to pretend you were premature when you arrived. We had to maintain the fiction that everything was proper and respectable. What does any of this have to do with Isabel? David asked, his voice tight with emotion. Patricia turned to look at him fully for the first time, and the expression on her face was something between guilt and grief. Isabel worked for us during that time. She was there the night I almost died, the night of the emergency. She saw everything, the panic, the blood, the fear. And she was pregnant too, maybe 6 months along. She was so kind to me, so gentle. She held my hand in the ambulance while Mother screamed at the paramedics to drive faster. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner, counting down seconds that felt like eternities. Mother noticed how Isabel looked at my baby after Samantha was born, Patricia continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. She said Isabel was getting too attached, that it was inappropriate, that she was making her uncomfortable. And then when Isabel's baby was born a month later, Patricia pressed her hands to her face. Mother said the baby had been stillborn. She said Isabel had delivered at home, that there had been complications, that it was tragic, but these things happened. It was a lie, Samantha said, the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. David didn't die. He was stolen. Grandmother took him and gave him up for adoption. Patricia nodded, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I didn't know the truth until years later. I found documents in Mother's safe after your father and I separated the first time, back when you were 10. Birth certificates, adoption papers, letters from Isabel begging for her son back. Mother had orchestrated everything, had convinced Isabel the baby would be taken by CPS if she didn't cooperate, had threatened her with deportation, had paid off officials and lawyers and anyone who might ask questions. Why? David's voice was raw, broken. Why would she do that? Patricia looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. Because Isabel had seen too much. Because she knew the truth about Samantha's birth, about the scandal we were hiding. Mother was terrified that Isabel would talk, would expose us, would destroy the careful story we'd constructed. So she took the one thing Isabel loved most in the world and used it as leverage. Keep our secrets, and maybe someday you'll find your son. Talk, and you'll never see him again. That was the deal. A mother's love turned into a weapon. Samantha felt her legs give out. She sank onto the antique sofa that had probably cost more than Isabel had earned in her entire time working for the Holloways. David moved to her side, his hand finding hers, and they sat there together. Two people whose entire identities had been constructed on lies told by people who were supposed to protect them. There's more, Patricia said, her voice barely audible now. Something I only discovered recently, after Mother died. Something that changes everything you think you know. She walked to the mahogany secretary desk in the corner and pulled out a manila folder that had been hidden in a locked drawer. Inside were medical records, DNA test results, documents stamped with official seals and signatures. 6 months before she died, Mother got drunk one night, more drunk than usual. She told me something that I didn't want to believe, something so horrible that I had the medical examiner run tests during her autopsy, using tissue samples. Patricia's hands trembled as she held out the folder. Samantha, sweetie, I need you to be strong for what I'm about to tell you. Samantha took the folder with numb fingers. Inside was a DNA analysis, comparing tissue samples from Eleanor Holloway's autopsy to samples taken from Samantha during a routine medical exam years earlier. The words swam in front of her eyes, medical terminology that she couldn't quite process, until David leaned over her shoulder and read aloud the conclusion at the bottom of the report. Subject A and Subject B show no genetic relationship. Probability of biological grandmother-granddaughter connection, 0.0%. Subject B's mitochondrial DNA indicates maternal lineage consistent with Hispanic heritage, inconsistent with documented family history. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed 5 p.m. In the gardens outside a bird sang, oblivious to the destruction of everything these people had believed about themselves. "I'm not your biological daughter," Samantha whispered, the words feeling foreign in her mouth like she was speaking a language she'd never learned. "I'm not a Holloway at all." Patricia's face crumpled. "You are my daughter in every way that matters. I carried you. I gave birth to you. I raised you. But biologically..." She couldn't finish. "Then whose child am I?" Samantha's voice rose to a scream. "Who the hell am I?" Patricia looked at David, then back at her daughter, and spoke the truth that would shatter everything. "We think you were Isabel's daughter. We think Mother switched the babies that night at the hospital, took Isabel's healthy daughter, and gave her the stillborn Holloway baby. We think she did it to guarantee Isabel's silence, to make sure she could never leave, never talk, never threaten our secrets, because what mother would abandon the family raising her own flesh and blood?" 3 days passed in a fog of disbelief and DNA tests, and lawyers' offices that smelled like leather and old money and the slow grinding machinery of truth, delayed for 3 decades. Samantha had moved into a hotel, the Citizen on J Street in downtown Sacramento, the kind of boutique place where nobody asked questions if you spent entire days in your room ordering room service and crying into expensive pillows. David stayed with his adoptive parents, sleeping in his childhood bedroom with its faded Stanford pennant still tacked to the wall and participation trophies from high school track gathering dust on the bookshelf. Martha Mitchell had made him his favorite comfort foods, pot roast, mashed potatoes, apple pie, but he could barely taste any of it. Everything felt muted, distant, like he was watching his own life through a screen. The official DNA results were due back any day now, the ones that would confirm what they already knew in their bones, that David and Samantha were siblings, children of Isabel Rodriguez, separated at birth by a woman whose cruelty was matched only by her obsession with maintaining appearances. It was a Wednesday morning, gray and drizzling in that particularly depressing Northern California way, when the doorbell rang at the Mitchell house. George answered it to find a courier holding a large manila envelope, the kind attorneys use for important documents, with "urgent, personal, and confidential" stamped across the front in red ink. The return address made David's blood run cold. Whitmore and Associates, the same law firm that had represented Eleanor Holloway in 1992, the one that had sealed all the court records and buried the truth under legal protections that were supposed to last until 2067. Inside the envelope was a letter on expensive letterhead, signed by Marcus Whitmore III, senior partner, age 78, a man who'd been practicing law in Sacramento since before David was born. The letter was brief and formal. "Mr. Mitchell, I am writing to inform you that I have recently become aware of certain facts regarding your origins that were unknown to me at the time I represented the Holloway family in 1992. As an officer of the court, I have a duty to correct miscarriages of justice, regardless of attorney-client privilege when criminal activity is involved. Enclosed, you will find documents that I believe you have a right to see. I have also sent copies to the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office. My conscience, though late in coming, compels me to do what should have been done 32 years ago. I am prepared to face any professional consequences for this disclosure. Some sins cannot be taken to the grave. Monsieur Whitmore III." Attached to the letter was a second, smaller envelope, sealed with the same red wax David had seen on the anonymous note that had been left in the shoebox. But this time, pressed into the wax was a seal, a coat of arms David didn't recognize with a motto in Latin he couldn't read. His hands shook as he broke the seal. Inside was a diary. Not a full diary, but photocopies of specific pages, dated from June through August of 1992. The handwriting was elegant, educated, the penmanship of someone who'd attended private schools where cursive was still taught with rigor. It was Eleanor Holloway's diary, her private thoughts, the truth she'd never told anyone, preserved in ink and now exposed to the light like a vampire caught at sunrise. David sat down at the kitchen table, his mother hovering anxiously nearby, and began to read. Each entry was more devastating than the last. a chronicle of calculated cruelty and cold-blooded manipulation that made him feel physically ill. June 15, 1992, Patricia's baby was born dead this morning. Blue and silent. The doctors say it happens sometimes with premature births. She is devastated. I am devastated. But more than that, I am terrified. The scandal of her unwed pregnancy was bad enough. But to have the baby die, people will talk. They will say we are cursed. They will say God is punishing us for our sins. I cannot allow that. June 16, 1992. The Mexican maid, Isabel, gave birth today in the attic room where I've been keeping her hidden. A healthy baby girl, perfect and pink and screaming with life. An idea came to me in the early morning hours. A terrible idea. A necessary idea. No one knows about Isabel's baby except Dr. Holloway and me. The birth was not registered. It never happened, officially. And Patricia's baby, the dead one, we could say there was a mistake at the hospital. We could say she survived after all. Who would question it? Who would dare investigate the Holloways? David's vision blurred with tears. He could barely continue reading, but he forced himself to go on. Martha Mitchell stood behind him, reading over his shoulder, her hand pressed to her mouth in horror. June 17, 1992. It is done. Isabel's baby girl is now Patricia's baby girl. We told Isabel her child died during delivery, gave her the dead Holloway baby to hold while she was still groggy from the difficult birth. She wept so beautifully, so genuinely. She suspects nothing. Dr. Holloway has falsified the birth certificates. The dead baby has been cremated. No open casket, no questions. Patricia holds her daughter and has no idea she is holding the child of the maid who cleans her bathroom. The irony is almost poetic. July 10, 1992. Isabel is becoming a problem. She recovered from the birth, but she will not stop crying, will not stop talking about her dead baby. She is making the other staff uncomfortable. I see the way she looks at baby Samantha. Patricia insists on that name, after Richard's mother. There is recognition in Isabel's eyes sometimes, a maternal instinct that no amount of lies can completely suppress. I must find a way to ensure her silence permanently. July 14, 1992. A solution has presented itself. Isabel revealed in confidence that she has another child, a son, about 1 year old, being cared for by her sister in Mexico. She wants to send money home for him. I have made her an offer. I will pay for her son to be brought to America, will arrange papers, will ensure he has a good life with an American family who can give him opportunities she never could. In exchange, she will sign away all rights, leave Sacramento, and never speak of her time in this house to anyone. She agreed. The desperation of poverty makes people so wonderfully compliant. But there was a handwritten note paperclip to this entry, in different ink, clearly added later. I lied. Isabel had no son in Mexico. She had no family there at all. But she was so desperate to believe she could help some child, any child, that she believed my fiction. In truth, the baby boy we arranged for adoption was hers, the one born 3 weeks ago in my gardener's shed while I told her she was being taken to the hospital. I had her sedated during the birth. She never even saw him. 2 children stolen from one woman. I am either a monster or a genius. History will depend on who tells the story. The diary pages continued, detailing how Eleanor had paid Marcus Whitmore to seal all the records, how she'd threatened Isabel with deportation and prison if she ever tried to find her children, how she'd maintained this fiction for 3 decades, checking in occasionally with the adoption agency to ensure the Rodriguez boy was thriving, as if that somehow absolved her of her sins. The final entry, dated August 1st, 1992, was the most chilling. I have secured my family's future. Patricia has a beautiful daughter. That daughter will inherit our name, our wealth, our legacy, and she will never know she carries the blood of a Mexican maid. And somewhere in Sacramento, Isabel's son is being raised by school teachers who will give him every advantage his biological mother never could. I have done them all a favor, really. I have lifted these children out of poverty and obscurity, and given them better lives. Why, then, do I feel Richard's eyes on me at night like judgment? Why do I drink until I cannot remember Isabel's screams when we told her both her babies were dead? The price of civilization, I suppose, is sometimes measured in the suffering of those too weak to resist it. David's hands were shaking so violently he dropped the pages. They fluttered to the kitchen floor like dead leaves, like evidence at a murder scene. His mother was crying openly now, her arms wrapped around him from behind, holding him together while he fell apart. She knew, David whispered. Eleanor knew all along. She knew I was Isabel's son. She knew Samantha was Isabel's daughter. And she watched me date Samantha, watched us fall in love, attended our engagement party with champagne and congratulations, knowing the entire time that we were siblings. She was going to let us get married. She was going to let us... He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't give voice to the full horror of what Eleanor had been willing to allow rather than admit the truth. The envelope contained one more item, a flash drive, labeled simply insurance. David took it to the family computer in the den and inserted it with trembling hands. The drive contained video files, dated from 2019 to 2022, the years before Eleanor's death. He clicked on the most recent one, dated March 2022, just weeks before Eleanor had died. The video showed her in what appeared to be her bedroom, sitting in front of her vanity, looking into the camera with eyes that were clear despite the vodka bottle visible on the dresser behind her. She looked old, sick, the cancer that would kill her already visible in the hollows of her cheeks and the yellow tinge to her skin. When she spoke, her voice was steady, cold, completely devoid of remorse. My name is Eleanor Jane Holloway, and this is my confession. If you are watching this, I am dead, and someone has finally found the courage to expose what I have done. Good. It is time. I am tired of carrying these secrets. I am tired of seeing Isabel Rodriguez's face in my dreams, hearing her children cry in the empty spaces of this house. I switched the babies. I stole 2 children from a woman whose only crime was being poor and pregnant in a house that valued appearance over humanity. I did it to protect my family's name, and I would do it again. Because that is what mothers do. We protect our children, even if it means destroying someone else's. Judge me if you want. God certainly will. But know this, every family like mine has bodies buried somewhere. I am simply the one honest enough to mark the graves. The video ended. David sat in the blue light of the computer screen, feeling like something fundamental had broken inside him. Not just his heart, but his understanding of what human beings were capable of, the depths of cruelty that could hide behind manicured gardens and charitable donations and Sunday church attendance. Finding Isabel Rodriguez took less time than David expected. In the age of social media and public records databases, even people who wanted to disappear left digital footprints. A utility bill here, a vehicle registration there, the small administrative debris of simply being alive in America. She lived in Sonoma, about an hour north of San Francisco, in a small cottage on the edge of a vineyard that had been converted into affordable housing for agricultural workers. The address came from Marcus Whitmore's files. He'd kept track of her all these years, sending her anonymous money orders every month, his own private penance for the role he'd played in Eleanor's crimes. David drove there alone on a Saturday morning, the first week of October, when the grape harvest was in full swing and the valley smelled like fermentation and earth and new beginnings. He'd debated bringing Samantha, but she was still processing everything, still trying to reconcile the mother she'd known with the sister she'd become, still deciding whether Patricia Holloway deserved forgiveness or a restraining order. The cottage was painted yellow, cheerful despite its modest size, with a small garden in front where someone had planted roses and marigolds with more hope than skill. A wind chime made from sea glass hung on the porch, catching the morning light and throwing rainbow fragments across the weathered wood. David sat in his car for 10 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to find the courage to walk up those 3 porch steps and knock on the door. What did you say to the mother who'd been stolen from you? What words existed for a reunion that should have happened 32 years ago, that had been delayed by cruelty and lies, and the calculated evil of a woman who'd died without ever facing justice? Finally, he got out of the car. Each step toward the porch felt like walking through water, like his body was resisting the weight of this moment. He raised his hand to knock, but before his knuckles could touch the wood, the door opened. Isabel Rodriguez stood there, smaller than he remembered from the wedding, more fragile, like she'd been carved from paper and might blow away in a strong wind. She wore a simple house dress covered with a floral apron, and her hair, completely silver now, was pulled back in the same style she'd worn in all those old photographs. Her hands, those work-worn hands that had cleaned the Holloway mansion and held her stolen babies and written hundreds of letters that were never sent, trembled as she raised them to her mouth. "David," she whispered, and the sound of his name in her voice, his biological mother's voice, broke something open in his chest that he hadn't realized was still sealed shut. "Isabel," he said back. And then they were both crying, standing in the doorway of this yellow cottage, two strangers who shared DNA and trauma, and a history neither of them had been allowed to claim. She reached out tentatively, like she was afraid he might disappear if she touched him, and her fingers brushed his cheek. The same gesture she'd made in one of the photographs from the attic, touching her newborn son's face, as if trying to memorize it before he was taken away. "You look like your father," she said softly, and David realized with a start that he'd never even thought to ask about the man who'd fathered him, too consumed with the revelation about Eleanor's crimes and his relationship to Samantha. "Who was he?" David asked. Isabel's expression darkened. She stepped back, holding the door open wider. "Come inside. This story is too heavy to tell standing up." The cottage interior was simple but immaculately clean. The home of someone who'd spent decades working in other people's houses and had very specific ideas about what clean meant. Religious icons hung on the walls. The Virgin of Guadalupe, a crucifix, a framed prayer in Spanish. Photographs crowded every available surface. Nieces and nephews, Isabel explained. Children of the sister who died 5 years ago, the family she'd helped raise from a distance while mourning the children she couldn't. They sat at a small kitchen table with a vinyl tablecloth printed with sunflowers. Isabel made coffee in an old percolator, the kind David's grandmother used to use, and the familiar smell of it brewing was somehow comforting, despite the strangeness of everything else. "Your father," Isabel began, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug like she needed its warmth, "was not a good man. His name was Thomas Whitmore, Jr. He was the son of the lawyer who worked for the Holloways. He came to the mansion sometimes for parties, for business meetings with Eleanor. He was handsome, charming, married with 2 children, and he was cruel in the way that men who have never been told no can be cruel." David felt his stomach turn. Marcus Whitmore III had sent him those documents, had exposed his own father's crimes along with Eleanor's. The weight of that decision, to destroy your own family's reputation in service of truth, suddenly made sense in a way that was almost unbearable. "He cornered me in the wine cellar one afternoon when I was restocking the liquor cabinet for one of Eleanor's parties," Isabel continued, her voice steady now, like she'd practiced this story in her head for 3 decades. "I said no. I fought. But he was strong, and I was alone. And no one came when I screamed because the cellar was soundproofed so the parties upstairs wouldn't be disturbed by noise. Afterward, he gave me $50 and told me I should be grateful a man like him had noticed a woman like me." The rage that filled David was white-hot, consuming. His hands clenched into fists on the table. "Did you tell Eleanor?" Isabel laughed, but it was a sound without humor, bitter as burnt coffee. "I tried. She said I was lying, that I was trying to trap her friend's son, that girls like me always wanted to ruin respectable men. She said if I told anyone else, she'd make sure I was deported and my family in Mexico would lose the money I sent them every month. So I stayed quiet. And then I realized I was pregnant." "With me," David said. "With you," Isabel confirmed, and now tears were sliding down her weathered cheeks. "And I wanted you, mijo. God help me despite everything. I wanted you. I thought maybe something good could come from something so terrible. I thought maybe God was giving me a reason to keep living after what had been done to me. She reached across the table and took his hands. Her hands small and calloused, his hands larger, surgeon's hands that had inherited her capacity for careful, deliberate work, even if they'd been shaped by a completely different life. Eleanor told me you died, Isabel said, her voice breaking now. She let me hold a dead baby, someone else's dead baby, and told me it was you. And I believed her because why would I think someone could be so evil? Why would I think a woman would steal a living child and replace it with a dead one? It wasn't until I saw you at the wedding, saw your face, that I knew the truth. You have your father's nose, but my eyes, my mother's eyes. I knew you instantly, even after 32 years. Why didn't you try to find me before? David asked, the question coming out harsher than he intended. Why wait until the wedding? Isabel's face crumpled. Because I was afraid. Because Eleanor told me if I ever tried to contact you, she would make sure you knew how you were conceived, would destroy your image of yourself, would tell everyone your mother was a maid who'd seduced her employer's friend. She said she had the power to ruin not just me, but you, your adoptive parents, everyone. And I believed her because I'd seen what she was capable of. So I watched from a distance. I moved to Sonoma because it was close enough to Sacramento that I could sometimes see news about the Holloway family, about their granddaughter who I suspected might be. She stopped, unable to finish. Your daughter, David said gently. Samantha is your daughter too. Eleanor stole her from you the same way she stole me. We're twins, Isabel, brother and sister. Both of us taken from you on the same day. Isabel's sob was wrenching, primal, the sound of grief that had been compressed for 3 decades suddenly finding release. She folded forward over the table, her shoulders shaking, and David moved around to her side, kneeling beside her chair, putting his arms around this woman who was his mother, letting her cry into his shoulder while he cried too. They stayed like that for a long time until the coffee went cold, and the morning light shifted across the kitchen floor, and the wind chimes on the porch played their glass song. When Isabel finally pulled back, she cupped David's face in both hands. The same gesture from the photograph, the one she'd been denied for 32 years, and studied him with eyes that were memorizing every detail, as if afraid he might disappear again. I have something for you, she said, standing on shaky legs and walking to a closet in the hallway. She returned with a cardboard box, not a shoebox this time, but a banker's box, the kind you store important documents in. I've been keeping these all these years for you, for when you were ready to know who you are. Inside the box were more photographs, more letters, but also other treasures. A baby tooth that Martha and George had given to the adoption agency years ago, not knowing it would find its way to Isabel through Marcus Whitmore's guilty conscience. A lock of dark baby hair carefully preserved in a plastic bag. Report cards that Isabel had somehow obtained, tracking David's progress through school from a distance. Newspaper clippings about his acceptance to Stanford, his graduation from medical school, his work at UCSF. You've been watching my whole life, David said, wonder mixing with his grief. Every day, Isabel confirmed. Every single day I thanked God you were alive and well and loved, even if you couldn't be loved by me. Marcus Whitmore III requested to meet them at his office on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, when Sacramento was experiencing one of those unseasonably warm Indian summer days that felt like a gift from a universe that had been particularly cruel lately. His law firm occupied the top floor of a historic building on Capitol Avenue, the kind of old-money establishment with mahogany paneling and oriental rugs, and the quiet hum of secrets being kept for wealthy clients. David, Samantha, and Isabel sat together in the conference room, an unlikely family reunion around a table that had probably witnessed countless divorces and estate battles, and the mundane legal machinery of lives falling apart. Isabel sat between her 2 children, a hand on each of their arms, as if physical contact was the only thing that could prove they were real, that this wasn't another cruel dream. Whitmore entered slowly using a cane, his once imposing frame bent by age and what looked like the physical manifestation of guilt. He was 78 but looked older, his face carved with deep lines that spoke of sleepless nights and moral compromises that had compounded with interest over decades. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice still commanding despite his frailty. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what my family helped perpetrate. But there are things you need to know, things that will help you understand not just what happened, but why, and what happens next." He placed a leather portfolio on the table, the kind lawyers use for estate documents and wills. "My father, Thomas Whitmore Jr., died in 2003. Liver failure brought on by alcoholism. He never spoke of what he did to you, Isabel. Never acknowledged David's existence. But when he was dying, delirious from hepatic encephalopathy, he talked about a Mexican girl and a baby and mistakes that couldn't be undone. My mother told me before she died that she'd always suspected, always known something terrible had happened, but she'd chosen to protect the family name over pursuing the truth." Isabel's hand tightened on David's arm. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady. "I don't want his apologies. He's beyond justice now. But your father is not the only one who bears responsibility." "No," Whitmore agreed. "Eleanor Holloway was the architect. My father was the assault, but his voice cracked. "I was the accomplice who made it all legally binding. I sealed those records. I made sure Isabel couldn't pursue custody or even visitation. I convinced a judge that it was in the best interest of the children to be adopted by suitable families, rather than raised by their biological mother. I'm the one who wrote the paperwork that stole your children from you legally, Isabel." He opened the portfolio with shaking hands. "I've spent the last 5 years since Eleanor's death trying to make amends. I've liquidated portions of my retirement accounts. I've sold my vacation home in Tahoe. I've cashed in life insurance policies, and I've established a trust." He slid documents across the table. "The Isabel Rodriguez Compensation Trust, funded with $3 million. It's yours, Isabel, for the 32 years you lost with your children, for the trauma, for everything." Isabel stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. "I don't want your money." "I know," Whitmore said gently. "But you deserve it. And more than that, your children deserve to know that at least one person involved in this horror was willing to sacrifice something meaningful to acknowledge the harm done. The trust is structured so that upon your death it passes to David and Samantha equally. Call it reparations. Call it blood money. Call it whatever helps you accept it." Samantha spoke for the first time since entering the office. "What about the Holloway estate? Eleanor's money? She was the one who orchestrated all of this." Whitmore nodded, as if he'd been expecting this question. "That's more complicated. Patricia Holloway, as Eleanor's daughter, inherited the bulk of the estate. However, I've filed a motion with Sacramento Superior Court to void Eleanor's will on the grounds that it was based on fraudulent misrepresentation of familial relationships. Specifically that Samantha was represented as Patricia's biological daughter when in fact she is Isabel's biological daughter." He looked at Samantha with something like pity. "You have a legal claim to Eleanor's estate as her biological granddaughter, through Isabel, not through Patricia. The DNA evidence is irrefutable. But pursuing that claim means exposing everything publicly, means destroying what remains of the Holloway family reputation, means putting your mother, Patricia, through a trial that will be covered by every media outlet in California." Samantha was silent for a long moment, staring at her hands that looked like Isabel's hands, she realized now, the same long fingers, the same shape to the nails. "I don't want their money," she said finally. "I don't want anything that came from that family. Patricia raised me. She loved me even if I wasn't biologically hers. She's the victim here too. She lost a baby and was given someone else's child without her knowledge or consent." "That's very gracious of you," Whitmore said. "But I need you to understand something. If you don't pursue the estate claim, the Holloway money, millions of dollars built partially on the exploitation of workers like your mother, maintained through crimes like the one committed against your family, will pass to distant Holloway relatives who had nothing to do with you and will never know the cost of their inheritance." David leaned forward. "What are you suggesting?" I'm suggesting that Samantha file the claim that she win it, which she will, the evidence is overwhelming, and that she then establish a foundation. The Isabel Rodriguez Foundation for Exploited Domestic Workers. Use the Holloway money to help other women in positions like Isabel was in, vulnerable, alone, prey to powerful families who think they can do whatever they want without consequences. Turn Eleanor's evil into something that prevents future evil. The idea hung in the air like a benediction. Isabel was crying again, but this time they were different tears. Not grief, but something approaching hope, the kind that comes when suffering finds purpose. "I'll do it," Samantha said. "But only if Isabel agrees. It's her story, her pain. I won't profit from it without her consent." Isabel reached across the table and took both of Samantha's hands in hers, the first time they'd really touched since the wedding, since the world had exploded and reformed into this strange new configuration. "Mija," she said, the Spanish endearment coming naturally now. "You are my daughter. You were always my daughter, even when I didn't know you were alive. If my suffering can prevent even one other mother from losing her children the way I lost mine, then maybe God didn't abandon me after all. Maybe he was just waiting for the right time to make something beautiful from something broken." The lawsuit took 9 months to work through the courts. Patricia Holloway didn't contest it. She'd been devastated by the revelations about her mother, about the baby she'd thought was hers, about the elaborate fiction her entire life had been built upon. She'd moved to Oregon to live with her sister, leaving the Sacramento mansion empty, a monument to crimes no one wanted to remember. Richard Holloway, faced with evidence of his complicity in the baby switch and his professional misconduct, had surrendered his medical license rather than face a hearing before the California Medical Board. He'd issued a public apology that David had read once and then deleted, words that felt hollow, coming 32 years too late. The day the judge ruled in Samantha's favor, awarding her the entire Holloway estate minus Patricia's share and legal fees, Isabel was in the hospital. She'd collapsed 3 weeks earlier while working in the vineyard garden, a massive stroke that the doctor said had probably been building for years. The physical manifestation of stress carried too long, of trauma that had carved channels through her brain the same way water carves canyons through stone. David sat by her bedside in the ICU at Sonoma Valley Hospital, holding the hand that had cleaned the Holloway mansion, that had held him for 47 minutes before he was stolen, that had written hundreds of letters to children she'd been told were dead. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, marking time that was running out. "Mama," he said, the first time he'd called her that, the Spanish word feeling right in a way the English never had. "We won. Samantha got the estate. We're going to start the foundation. Your story is going to save other families." Isabel's eyes fluttered open, cloudy with medication but still present, still aware. She smiled, a small, peaceful smile that David would remember for the rest of his life. Her lips moved, forming words he had to lean close to hear. "Tell your sister. Tell Samantha that I loved her every day, even when I thought she was theirs. I loved her because my heart knew what my mind couldn't remember." "She knows," David whispered. "She's on her way. She'll be here soon." But Isabel's eyes were already closing, her breathing becoming shallower. David called for the nurses, but he already knew what was happening. He'd seen enough death in his years as a trauma surgeon to recognize when someone was choosing to let go, when the body decided it had carried enough and it was time to rest. Samantha arrived 20 minutes later, bursting through the ICU doors with tears already streaming down her face. She made it to the bedside just as Isabel took her last breath, just in time to hold the hand she'd been separated from 32 years ago and never got enough time to know. They buried Isabel Rodriguez on a hillside in Sonoma, overlooking the vineyards where she'd spent her final years. The funeral was small, her nieces and nephews from Mexico, Martha and George Mitchell, Marcus Whitmore leaning heavily on his cane, and a surprising number of workers from the vineyard who said Isabel had been kind to them, had shared her lunch when they forgot theirs, had listened to their stories about the children they'd left behind in other countries to work in these fields. On Isabel's gravestone, they'd inscribed words from one of her letters. "My children, wherever you are, know that you were loved beyond measure. Distance does not diminish a mother's heart. 6 months after Isabel's death, the Isabel Rodriguez Foundation opened its doors in a renovated building in downtown Sacramento. It provided legal aid to domestic workers, offered shelter to pregnant women fleeing exploitative employers, and funded DNA testing for families separated by adoption or immigration. Samantha ran it with the fierce determination of someone who'd found purpose in pain, and David served on the board while continuing his work as a surgeon. They never got married, obviously, but they'd found something better than romance. They'd found the family they were meant to have all along. They had dinner together every Sunday, sometimes at Samantha's apartment, sometimes at David's house, always with an extra place set at the table for the mother who'd loved them enough to keep their memory alive even when the world told her they were dead. And in the vineyards of Napa Valley, where a wedding had shattered and truth had been born, the grapevines continued their patient work, dying back each winter, rising again each spring, teaching the eternal lesson that some things must break open before they can bear fruit. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not holding on, but letting go. Isabel Rodriguez spent 32 years believing her children were dead, yet she never stopped loving them, never stopped hoping, never stopped keeping their memory alive in her heart. When the truth finally emerged, it came too late for her to build the life with them she deserved, but just in time to transform their suffering into purpose. Her story asks us the hardest questions. What would you sacrifice to protect your children? How long would you carry a secret that was destroying you? And when faced with a truth that could shatter everything, would you have the courage to speak it at the altar, in front of everyone you know, knowing there's no going back? David and Samantha lost the future they'd imagined together, but they gained something perhaps more valuable, the truth about where they came from, and a mission to ensure no other family suffers what theirs did. Eleanor Holloway's cruelty created wounds that will never fully heal, but from those wounds came a foundation that protects the vulnerable, gives voice to the silenced, and turns generational trauma into generational healing. That's the paradox of human resilience. Our deepest pain often becomes our greatest purpose. The question is, when life breaks you open, what will you choose to let grow in the cracks? If this story moved you, if it made you think about the secrets families keep and the price we pay for appearances over truth, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and follow our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of our shared humanity. Your engagement helps these important narratives reach the people who need them most. Thank you for listening, and may you always have the courage to choose truth over comfort and love over fear.